My name is Captain Mansa Edgier. I am 34 years old. I have been a casualty notification officer for 3 years, and on a Tuesday morning in March, I knocked on a door in a quiet street in Accra to inform a woman named Mrs. Comfort Kpodo that her son had been killed in action. I have delivered this news before, 11 times in 3 years. There is no version of it that becomes easier. You learn the words, you learn the posture, you learn how to hold the space that opens when a family receives what you have come to bring. You do not learn how to feel nothing. I was standing at the door with Sergeant Abba Finn beside me, welfare folder in hand, when the door opened. Mrs. Comfort Kpodo was in her early 60s, small, a church dress she had clearly not been expecting to wear that morning. She looked at my uniform, she looked at the welfare folder. She understood immediately what kind of officers stand at a door on a Tuesday morning with a welfare folder. Her face did what faces do in that moment, and then she looked past me. She looked at the driver assigned to the detail, the officer who had brought us here and who had walked to the door as the transport protocol required. He was standing slightly behind me to my left, holding the vehicle keys. She looked at him, and she said one word. She said, "Samuel." Let me tell you who Samuel was. Private Samuel Kpodo, 26 years old, a signals operator. He had enlisted 3 years ago. He had been deployed to a region I will not name for operational reasons. He had been part of a small unit conducting a communications intelligence operation. 6 weeks ago, that unit had come under unexpected fire. In the chaos that followed, 3 soldiers had been confirmed dead, 2 had been extracted, and 1 had not been accounted for. Private Samuel Kpodo had not been accounted for. After 72 hours of search operations, his commanding officer had filed a killed in action report, standard protocol when a soldier is unaccounted for after an extended search in hostile conditions. It was not a confirmed death. It was a documented disappearance in circumstances that met the threshold for KIA classification. His body had not been recovered. His body had not been recovered because he did not have a body to recover. He had been found, not by his unit, not by any military search team, by a civilian emergency medical team operating in the region under a humanitarian mandate. They had found a man with no identification and no dog tags, and injuries severe enough to require immediate evacuation. They had treated him as an unidentified patient. They had moved him through a civilian medical pathway that had no connection to the military notification system. He had been in a civilian hospital in a neighboring country for 6 weeks. He had been listed as killed in action for 6 weeks. His mother had been grieving for 6 weeks, and he had been standing behind me at her door. Samuel had been assigned to the welfare office driver rotation that week. He had driven notification details before. This was one of several assignments on his schedule for Tuesday. He had been given the address. He had driven to it. He had walked to the door because that was what the transport protocol required of the assigned driver. He had not known why this address meant anything, because he did not remember this address, because he did not remember this street, because the traumatic brain injury he had sustained 6 weeks ago during the operation had taken from him, along with many other things, the memory of the first 23 years of his life. The partial ID card found in his pocket during his initial treatment had been damaged, partially legible. The civilian medical team had done their best with what they had. The name reconstructed from that partial ID had been processed through a civilian system that had no link to the military personnel records. His transfer to the base had been handled by an administrative officer who had processed the paperwork correctly given what was in front of him. No cross-reference had been triggered between the two systems. He had been on base for 2 weeks. He had been assigned to the transport rotation. He had driven me to his own mother's door, and he had not known her. The object at the center of everything was his dog tags, not the ones he had been wearing when he was found. Those had been lost in the field. the ones his mother pressed into my hands 20 minutes after she opened her door. She had kept them. She had been given them as part of the notification process 6 weeks ago, standard procedure, the soldier's personal effects. His tags had been recovered from the unit's equipment inventory, a spare set he had left in his locker before deployment. She had been sleeping with them on her bedside table. She pressed them into my hands and said, "Give them to him. He should have them. He always hated not wearing them." I carried them to where Samuel was standing in the hallway, still confused, still processing, surrounded by a situation he had been placed inside without understanding it, and I held them out to him. He looked at them for a long time. He said, "Those are mine," not as a memory, as a recognition, something in the physical fact of them, the weight and the shape and the worn edge of the chain. He said, "Those are mine," and Mrs. Kpodo, from the doorway of her own living room, made a sound I will carry for the rest of my career. I want to pause here, because standing in the hallway of a house I had come to deliver the worst news to, watching a man hold his own dog tags without knowing whose name was on them, is the moment this story became something I had not trained for and had no protocol to guide me through. If you have ever stood in the middle of something that had no procedure for what came next, drop a comment below. And subscribe right now, because what the investigation found about how Samuel ended up on base without anyone connecting him to his own KIA file is the part that has to be understood and accounted for. Colonel Jones Sekyi arrived within 2 hours. I had called the base the moment I understood what I was looking at. I had asked for senior oversight immediately, and I had not moved from that house until Sekyi arrived. Sergeant Abba Finn maintained the welfare contact with Mrs. Kpodo while I coordinated. Sekyi was composed and fast. She assessed the situation in the hallway in approximately 4 minutes, and then she did 3 things in rapid sequence. She had Samuel taken to the base medical facility for a full assessment. She contacted the civilian hospital in the neighboring country and began the process of obtaining his full medical records from the 6 weeks of treatment. She flagged the KIA record for immediate review and suspended the notification status. Then she sat down with Mrs. Kpodo in the living room. I did not hear that conversation. It was not mine to hear, but I heard the length of it. An hour and 20 minutes, and when Sekyi came out, her expression told me it had been one of the harder conversations she had conducted in a long career. The investigation. Dr. Kwame Idan from the medical division led the assessment of Samuel's condition. He was thorough, and he was honest with us about what he found and what he could and could not say with certainty. What he could say, the traumatic brain injury was consistent with blast exposure, the pattern of amnesia, profound retrograde loss, the first 23 years of his life largely inaccessible, recent memory functioning at a reduced but present level, was consistent with the injury's location and severity. This was not a presentation he could predict would resolve. Some patients with this profile recovered significant portions of lost memory over months or years. Some did not. He would not make a promise he could not keep. What he could not say, whether Samuel would ever remember his mother, whether the dog tags were the beginning of something or an isolated moment of physical recognition that would not deepen. The partial ID had been processed through a civilian system that had no link to the military's personnel records. The transfer to the base had been handled by an administrative officer who had processed the paperwork correctly given what was in front of him. No one had failed through negligence. A gap between 2 systems, civilian and military, had created a space large enough for a man to spend 2 weeks on his own base without anyone connecting him to his own name in his own file. The gap was closed after the investigation concluded. A cross-reference protocol was implemented. It would not happen again. It had happened once, to Samuel, to his mother. What happened in the months that followed? Samuel was assigned to the base medical facility for the duration of his recovery. He was not discharged. He was not returned to active duty. He was given time and support and access to the best available care.
Mrs. Kpodo came to the base every Saturday. She brought food. She sat with her son. She did not push him to remember. She did not perform her grief in front of him or ask him to perform recognition he did not have. She sat with him and she talked about ordinary things, the neighborhood, the church, the garden, and she waited. I know this because Sergeant Finn maintained the welfare contact with the family and reported to me monthly. At month 4, Samuel began asking Mrs. Kpodo questions about his childhood, not because he remembered it, because he wanted to know it.
At month 7, he remembered the garden. Not completely, not with the clarity of a restored memory, a sensation, the smell of something growing, the sound of water. He could not place it, and then Mrs. Kpodo described the garden behind their house in Accra, and he went very quiet. He said, "There was a tree." She said, "There was a tree." She said it in the voice of someone who has been waiting 7 months for a tree. Samuel. I visited him once during the recovery period, 4 months in, a brief visit. I was not his welfare officer, and it was not my role. I went because I had been the one standing at his mother's door on a Tuesday in March, and I needed to see for myself that the road from that doorway was going somewhere. He knew who I was, not from memory. Finn had told him about that morning. He knew the shape of what had happened. He asked me one question. He asked what his mother had looked like when she opened the door and saw him. I thought about how to answer that accurately. I said, "She looked like someone who had been given back something she had already learned to live without." He held that for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to remember her. I don't know when, but I am." He said it in the tone of a decision rather than a hope. I believed him. The KIA notification. The official record was corrected. Private Samuel Kpodo, alive, in recovery. Status updated. The corrected record sits beside the original KIA filing, both documents. The filing that was made in good faith from incomplete information, the correction that was made when the information became complete.
Both are real. Both are part of what happened. The notification I had been sent to deliver on a Tuesday morning in March was never delivered because the man who had driven me to his mother's door was standing in the hallway when she opened it, and she said his name, and he did not know it was his, but the dog tags knew. Here is what a Tuesday morning in March taught me. The protocols exist for a reason. Notification procedures, KIA classifications, transfer processing, all of it designed to handle the worst moments in the most humane way available. And sometimes the worst moment arrives in a shape the protocol was not designed for. No protocol had prepared me for standing in a hallway while a man held his own dog tags without knowing his name was on them. No protocol covers what Mrs. Kpodo did in the months that followed, the Saturdays, the ordinary conversations, the patience of a woman who understood that her son was in that room even when he could not find his way to her. That was not a protocol. That was her. And 7 months later, there was a tree. And that was enough. Drop a comment and tell me your story. I read every single one. And subscribe. I am here every week with a new story. She knocked on the door. She found more than she was sent to deliver. She did not leave until it was done.